Coast Guard, China Coast Guard. This is Philippine Coast Guard. This is clear of us.
Auto navigation. Clear the Leo here.
The Philippines has confirmed that the mysterious artificial structure recently spotted inside Scarborough Shoal was not a new installation after all. In a briefing on October 16, 2025, the Philippine Coast Guard, PCG, said it had traced the debris found in the shallow lagoon of the disputed shoal to satellite images dating as far back as 2010, debunking fears that China had secretly begun new construction. This verification highlights that the debris is long-standing and not indicative of recent construction, explained PCG spokesperson Commodore J. Terriella, noting that analysts cross-checked current photos with a 15-year imagery archive to establish the match.
Ang laban natin sa West Philippine Sea ay laban ng bawat Pilipino. Hindi to laban ng Coast Guard, hindi to laban ng Armed Forces of the Philippines.
The Philippine Navy, backing the assessment, added that similar remnants were also found in previous surveys, some of which date back to the period when Scarborough Shoal was used as a bombing range by U.S. and Philippine forces during the American bases era. In other words, the object may be a relic of older military activity, not a fresh foothold. But while the structure itself may be old, the conflict surrounding Scarborough Shoal is anything but. The lagoon remains effectively controlled by Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels, since Beijing seized de facto control in 2012. Filipino fishermen are still routinely blocked, chased, or water cannoned from a fishing ground that once sustained entire coastal communities in Zambales and Pangasinan. Manila continues to file diplomatic protests, insisting the shoal lies 124 nautical miles from Luzon, well within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, EEZ, and citing the 2016 Hague Arbitral ruling that recognized Scarborough as a traditional fishing area and struck down China's sweeping 9-line claim. Thus, the rediscovered structure may not be new, but it has resurfaced in a volatile moment. China has recently declared the shoal part of a so-called National Nature Reserve, prompting protests from Manila and concern from U.S. allies. With Chinese ships still guarding its mouth, Filipino boats still denied entry, and global attention returning to the West Philippine Sea, the true symbol of Scarborough Shoal is no longer the aging debris beneath its waters, but the unresolved struggle above them. The 2016 Arbitral Award remains the Philippines' strongest and most unshakable legal foundation in the Scarborough Shoal dispute, a pillar of international law that Beijing cannot erase, ignore, or drown out with Coast Guard ships and propaganda. On July 12, 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, PCA, in The Hague issued a unanimous ruling in favor of the Philippines, decisively striking down China's sweeping 9-line claim. The tribunal ruled that China's assertion of historic rights had no legal basis under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, a treaty both countries signed and are bound by. The ruling went further, specifying the legal nature of the feature itself.
An international court in The Hague has sided with the Philippines, overruling Beijing's claims in the South China Sea. For more on that and China's angry response,
the tribunal declared that Scarborough Shoal is a rock under UNCLOS Article 121.3. This classification matters enormously. As a rock, Scarborough can only generate a 12 nautical mile territorial sea. It cannot produce an exclusive economic zone, EEZ, or a continental shelf. In simple terms, Scarborough Shoal cannot override, shrink, or overlap the Philippines' 200 nautical mile EEZ, which is measured from the coastline of Luzon. The law is clear. Scarborough Shoal lies inside the Philippines' maritime zone, not China's. The tribunal also settled the question of traditional fishing rights. Because Scarborough has, for generations, been a shared fishing ground for Filipino, Chinese, and Vietnamese fishermen, the PCA affirmed that these communities retain traditional access to its waters, regardless of any sovereignty claims. On that basis, China's ongoing blockade, harassment, and water cannon attacks on Filipino fishermen are a direct violation of international law and humanitarian norms. Yet despite the clarity and overwhelming global support for the award, China rejected the ruling, dismissing it as null and void. Independent legal assessments show that Beijing has complied with only about 2 of the ruling's 11 directives, exposing a deliberate pattern of non-compliance and defiance of the rules-based international order. By contrast, the Philippines has consistently invoked the ruling in diplomatic protests, UN statements, and alliance consultations. Manila's position is firm. The award is final, binding, and non-negotiable.
The Philippines strongly affirms its respect for this milestone decision as an important contribution to ongoing efforts in addressing disputes in the South China Sea.
For the Philippines, the 2016 ruling is more than a courtroom victory. It is a legal shield, a diplomatic compass, and a moral weapon. It gives Manila the high ground in every international forum, reinforces alliances, and ensures that the fight for Scarborough Shoal is grounded not in emotion or force, but in law, legitimacy, and universal maritime rights. No matter how many ships China deploys, the ruling stands and it will remain the legal North Star guiding the Philippines' defense of its waters. The verification of long-standing underwater structures at Scarborough Shoal comes at a time when the West Philippine Sea is entering its most volatile phase in over a decade, as China intensifies both its gray zone coercion and hard military signaling. Since September 10, 2025, when Beijing unilaterally declared the shoal a national nature reserve, a move denounced by Manila as illegitimate, unlawful, and an attempt to disguise territorial expansion as conservation, China has escalated beyond its usual white-hold harassment. The Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, recorded an unprecedented 207 Chinese vessels swarming multiple WPS flashpoints in late 2024, including Scarborough, Sabina Shoal, and Ayungin Shoal, the highest concentration ever documented. On the surface, Chinese Coast Guard and militia vessels have tightened their exclusion tactics, deploying anchored floating barriers, metallic buoys, and blocking ships in rotating formations designed to slowly suffocate Philippine access. Beneath the surface, however, the newly verified debris raises darker questions about clandestine activity, especially when analyzed alongside China's emerging pattern of seabed manipulation and subsurface surveillance elsewhere in the region. The danger has grown far beyond water cannons and laser harassment. In August 2025, China deployed a Type 052D guided missile destroyer, a frontline warship normally reserved for high-end combat operations, to confront a Philippine mission near the shoal, a sharp departure from the previously civilian-fronted Coast Guard playbook. By October 2025, escalation extended into the air domain, when a PLA Air Force J-16 executed an alarming low-altitude intimidation pass on a PCG aircraft, prompting Manila to file a formal diplomatic protest. Meanwhile, at sea, the violence has become routine and visceral. In one of the most widely condemned cases, on September 16, 2025, China Coast Guard units blasted the BRP Datu Gumbay Piang with industrial-grade water cannons at close range, smashing the bridge windows, flooding the deck, disabling navigation and radio systems, and injuring Filipino crew members. A grim repeat of the notorious June 2024 Ayungin attack, where Chinese personnel brandished axes and knives, boarded a Philippine boat, and severed a Marine's thumb while attempting to seize equipment. By mid-October 2025, China's coercive force projection reached a fever pitch. When the Philippines attempted a humanitarian resupply mission under the Kadiwa Initiative, Beijing responded by deploying a staggering 34 surface assets, a mix of Coast Guard vessels, militia boats, and even a Type 054A frigate, Hengyang 568, which broadcast a chilling live-fire drill warning over open radio as a psychological warfare tactic. That same week, Chinese teams were observed installing new buoys and maritime security markers inside Scarborough Shoal, evidence of a creeping territorial wall being built, piece by piece, season by season, confrontation by confrontation. Despite this escalation, Manila has refused to be provoked into rash retaliation.
The Marcos administration has anchored its response on a doctrine of proportionate, deliberate, and reasonable deterrence, maintaining that the Philippines must fight on legal and diplomatic high ground while slowly tightening operational resilience at sea. As PCG spokesperson Commodore J. Terriella vowed, we will never abandon this area. We will continue our patrols, and we will continue to protect the livelihood of Filipino fishermen. This is our duty, and this is our right. Through its transparency initiative, the Philippines has turned every Chinese act of aggression into documented evidence, inviting local and foreign media aboard BFAR and PCG vessels, publicly releasing unedited footage, and exposing what Manila calls China's egregious and systemic violation of Philippine sovereign rights and UNCLOS-based international law. The strategy is clear. China dominates with ships, but the Philippines counters with legitimacy, visibility, and truth. The discovery of long-submerged structures in Scarborough Shoal and China's escalatory actions have only hardened Manila's resolve, pushing the Philippines toward a more dynamic, proactive, and responsive foreign policy.
Good morning.
One that defends national sovereignty not just through diplomacy, but through law, transparency, alliance building, and credible deterrence at sea. With tensions rising, the government has made clear that the issue will be front and center at the upcoming Bilateral Consultation Mechanism, BCM, talks, where the Philippines intends to confront Beijing over the Nature Reserve Declaration, the swelling presence of Chinese vessels, and now, the mystery of underwater objects inside its maritime domain.
But diplomacy is no longer Manila's only line of effort. The government is moving to fortify its legal architecture at home, fast-tracking the Maritime Zones Bill to codify, with unmistakable clarity, Philippine territorial and jurisdictional boundaries under UNCLOS and the 2016 Arbitral Award, leaving China with even less room to twist language, history, or maps. This domestic legal strengthening is crucial because it transforms the Philippines' position from being merely defended internationally to being anchored constitutionally. Public sentiment also reflects this trajectory. In surveys conducted in October 2025, Filipinos overwhelmingly voiced support for the government's strategy, with the Philippine Coast Guard emerging as the most trusted institution in the West Philippine Sea conflict, and an overwhelming majority backing the transparency policy that exposes China's aggression to the world in real time. For many Filipinos, particularly coastal communities whose livelihoods are on the line, this is no longer just a territorial dispute. It is a fight for dignity, survival, and future generations' right to the sea that fed their ancestors. Thus, the future course is set. Assert sovereignty, uphold international law, rally allies, expose coercion, and strengthen deterrence. The road ahead promises more diplomatic friction and more maritime confrontations, but also a more unified Philippines and a more awakened international community. Scarborough Shoal is no longer just a geopolitical flashpoint. It is now the stage where the Philippines is openly challenging the idea that might makes right, insisting instead that the rule of law, not the rule of force, must determine the future of the West Philippine Sea.